everyone, and welcome to Whiskey Book, where I relate whiskeys and books. Sometimes the whiskey's good, sometimes the book's good, sometimes they're both good. Let's find out after this intro what we have this time. Welcome back to Whiskey Book. So what do we got going on today? Well, before I get into the whiskey in the book, I'm going to change up formats a little bit. I'm going to get into the book first. I'm going to give a little history on it, history of the story behind it. And I'm going to pick 5 descriptors of that book that are real key to the storyline of the book. And I'm going to relate that and see if the whiskey gives off some of those same keys, and we're going to see if the book matches up to the whiskey. This ought to be interesting. So what do I have today? Well, today, and I'm going to show you on my iPad here because this is how I actually get through most of my books. I can listen to them on the audio book and do some other things. I don't have as much time to read as I'd like, but this is the Siege of Jadotville. And this is the cover on the book that you see on here is actually the cover of a, I believe it's Netflix. Yeah, it says right there, Netflix, I can read. Netflix movie about an Irish unit, military unit that was sent to the Congo as attached to a UN for peacekeeping. It didn't end up very peaceful, but we'll get into that later. So what do I get to compare that with today? Well, I get to do some Blue Spot. Wow. For me, this is awesome. This is about as good as it gets right now. And I can't wait. And I won't lie, I've actually had a little bit. Did have some on St. Patrick's Day with some corned beef. Not going to lie. It's really good, but we'll get into that. But it's not going to spoil my matchup. So, with further out, yeah, I can talk. Let's just get into the book. Siege of Jadotville, not Jadotville, Jadotville, is a book about the complexities of when you get politicians in their fingers in something that the military should handle or vice versa. And of course, it's not the only book ever written on that, but this is a true story. And the book, Siege of Jadotville, unlike the adaptation to Netflix, and the adaptation to Netflix is pretty good. The tactics it shows, the military equipment it shows, the leadership it shows, the interactions it shows isn't that bad. But the adaptation misses that this book really gets into, and that's going to be one of my words that we're going to go into. My descriptors for this book is it starts pretty slow and dry. What it's doing is it's setting up the entire political scheme of why this Irish unit went into the Congo in the first place. And I would say that's pretty much the first half of this book is like, it's just going into the UN members, you get a ton of names and people in positions, and this force against this force, and why these people are here and why these other folks are here. And it's half of it leads up to the actual conflict that takes place in the Congo. And so I'm not going to go deep into this book. That's not what I do. I just sort of give an overview, find some things related to the whiskey, and we go from there. But the premise of the book is that you've had an area that was not occupied, you could say occupied by the Dutch, going all the way back to sailing ships. They were the governing class of this area for so long. And finally, the Congolese in this one area of the Congo, and this is what this is about, this is Katanga, is the area we're talking about. They decided they didn't want to be ruled by outside governance anymore. And so revolt would be too hard of a word. They did what I would pretty much call a soft rebellion. Over time, they took over areas. They actually probably did it the right way. Their leadership gained a little more power, and bit by bit, they gained the will of the people and went up and said to the leadership and said, we're not going to be led anymore. We want to lead. We want our representatives in. And okay, so it gets complicated, but that's what this book is about. The book is, word number 1, complicated. It is a complicated mess. And how does it get complicated? Well, it's this entire political cloud over this whole area, and you have this group where outside forces like the United States and Sweden and France and England and holy cow, almost the entire side of the UN gets involved, but each country kind of has their fingers in this area anyway. And well, that many political leaders are going to have issues and problems, and so they put the UN in charge of keeping the peace in the area. The Congolese have their own military group that starts causing issues, and there's a separatist military group that's even a little more violent, and they're less well armed, but they're more violent. So the UN decides they need to send in peacekeepers, and we all know that. So the premise behind all of this is the mines in the area of this Congo put out enough metal for all the warships and missiles and a lot of equipment that both UN and Russia have. And Russia gets into this book later in assist the leaders of the Congolese against the UN in a proxy war. And so, of course, all of these countries are on the outside, and none of them actually do anything except sit out there and connive and scheme and plan. The UN is the ones that have to go in and keep the peace. And the UN has two different forces in the area at the time. They have an Indian force from India, and then they actually had a representative ask personally for the Irish Brigade to go in. So the Irish, who have been neutral, second word, neutral, I'm going to write that down so I don't forget it. That's the second word. The Irish have been kind of like you hear with the Swiss. They were neutral, and at this time, this Irish Brigade had no military accolades to their name, none whatsoever. And that plays into it because they end up fighting a mercenary group that is filled with former legionnaires, former mercenaries from other countries who have fought in wars and understand how wars are fought. And so they send in this Irish group, and the movie adaptation will have you believe they get in there and about 5 days later there's a fight. Well, no, this happens over months, a long period of time as the Irish go in there. They set up here, they set up there. There's some back and forth, and what the movie adaptation, and why I keep going back to the movie adaptation, because I'm a visual learner, and if you are too, that's a good way to kind of get that. Movie does a really good job of relating to this book, the interactions between the Irish Brigade and some of the mercenaries. At one point, they go to the same bar together. Well, that's a true story. It's kind of nuts. But so this Irish Brigade's there, and they end up having to dig in around this old church in Katanga, and at a town called Jadotville, which is a French name, and yes, French had influence in the area as well as the Dutch. And so this Irish military unit, 155 men, are set up, and they're supposed to set up defensive perimeters. And they're not the only Irish in the area, and the book gets into why this is A Company of the Irish, and B Company and C Company had been in this area with twice as many men, and they were taken out, and A Company was put in, and holy cow, nobody can still answer why that was, because A Company was sort of a reserve company. They went in there with bolt-action rifles equipped with World War I gear. It was really bad setup for them, and they were isolated. So the Irish were isolated, and they didn't have enough gear, they didn't have enough rounds of ammunition, they didn't have enough food, they didn't have enough water. They were counting on the battalion which was over this river and quite a few miles away to supply them if anything came about, because nobody in the area was really expecting a battle. And what the book gets into is the little bitty details of over time how this mercenary army got together, kind of crept up on them. They got spied on. They actually caught a couple spies in their camp one time. And the movie would have you think that everybody should know that this attacking army is coming. It's not true. In the book, it really lays out how a lot of well, we already said that, the political leadership didn't understand the tactical or strategic reasoning on the ground, the level They didn't understand what was going on. I'll make it simple. They did not know what was going on. They thought they had the political realm down, but they didn't understand the tactical, military, strategic level. So anyway, what ends up happening is, and I'm going to use this word, isolated. The Irish were eventually isolated. They were at Jadotville, dug in around this church, and I'm going to say dug in because this is a key thing that this book talks about. You see a little bit in the movie adaptation, but the book really talks about how C company did not dig in. A company decided to dig trenches, ended up probably saving their lives. But so they were isolated, they were cut off. Long story short, mercenaries attack, who are related to the Katanganese leadership, who Katanga wants to separate from the rest of Congo. UN doesn't want them to separate because they would then control the mines, and the Katanganese are talking to the Russians and want to broker deals with the Russians. So if I didn't make that clear before, I'm sorry. The book is really, really detailed. If you really want to get into that, read this book. It'd take me 2 hours just to detail all of those, the nuances of what got to the battle. But so this mercenary army that has about 3,000 soldiers, 1,500 to 3,000, depending on there's different times of the battle. It didn't happen in 2 days like the movie has you. This happened over about a week or so. They attack, they're repelled, they attack, they're repelled. The Irish, for never having fought, for having no real history of battle in their unit, their leadership, do a superb job of holding off this enemy force, even though, and this is going to be kind of an odd word to try to relate to a whiskey, but restrictions or restricted. The Irish were there on UN orders, which orders most basic was you don't fire first, you don't cause anything, you're there as a peacekeeper, you don't. Actually, at one point in the battle, and this is the only thing that this Irish company was ever. Later on, there's a whole war college did a whole study on this battle, and this Irish company. The only fault I could find is that they didn't crush the mercenaries. Once the mercenaries were beat back and started to retreat, they thought the Irish should have went out and destroyed the enemy. But you got to understand, these Irish are there as UN peacekeepers, and everything they were taught was, you just fight enough to keep the peace. That's basically what they were there for. And so they weren't there as a conquering army or even a defending army. They were there, doing military policing like we see so much of this day. And so the battles go on. Pretty soon the Irish start running out of ammo, water. The water was cut off. The water was actually pumped in from an outside source. That was cut off. Then the Katanganese had access to a pilot who had this old jet fighter from a different era, but hey, one fighter against no air cover. They strafed the Irish positions, and after a while it just wore the Irish down, and over a long period of time, even though the Irish didn't lose soldiers, they lost them to being wounded. They didn't have any killed, which is a miracle and amazing, but over time, defensive action, they couldn't hold out against that many. They ended up surrendering. It wasn't perceived very well that they had surrendered because this was the Irish only action in war, and to surrender looked really bad on them and the UN. And the book goes into detail how, the Irish brigade tried to come help them. They were stopped. They were bottlenecked at a bridge, couldn't get in to help them. So here's a key thing. In the movie, there's a kind of I don't want to give this away if you haven't seen it because it's kind of at the end, but let's just say there's a confrontation between a lower level officer and a higher level officer. Well, in the book, this is actually more peer-to-peer. The A company leader got into attacked basically the leader of the company that was supposed to come and relieve or assist him because he didn't think he fought hard enough to get to him. And the book does a really good job of going into both sides. So anyway, I don't want to go into a 30-minute synopsis of the entire book. I just want to relate this. So what do we got? I have four words here. So I have complicated because the situation was politically complicated. Neutral, because the Irish they had always been neutral, and this was the first time that they were called upon to be in a situation where they weren't neutral, which kind of plays into probably more reasons why they didn't take the initiative, attack, things like that. It just wasn't the UN rules. They've always been doctrinated to be neutral. But they were isolated. They were put out on their own. They couldn't be resupplied. They couldn't be reinforced. They were left to face this huge army by themselves. They were restricted in what they could do. And I'm going to go with, I was going to say multifaceted, because in this situation, I already talked about, you have the UN, you have the US, English, French, Dutch, Katanganese, other South African countries, Russians, all in this area with their fingers in this, causing the cogs to go. But it was of course, just the Irish and the Katanganese mercenaries at the point of the spear. You know what? Let's go sharp. Instead of that, let's go sharp, because the Irish were the point of the spear. They were the ones that actually did the work, or were out in the field that did the dirty work, like so many other battles in history. So anyway, let's get to see if this relates to the whiskey. All right, so Blue Spot whiskey. What is this? This is a single pot stilled Irish whiskey, aged 7 years, but it is cask strength. It is part of the Spot series. Put that up there again. Green Spot being the, I wouldn't say budget end, but their base offering. Then I think that's a 4-year whiskey. Could be wrong, might be 5. Then you have Blue Spot, which is 7 years. Yellow Spot, I believe 10 or 11 years. I'm sorry, I don't have one of those. And then Red Spot's 15 year. That's the higher end. It's like the $200 plus version. The thing about Blue Spot is it was not available in the US for a few years, at least a couple years. And now it's back, and I've seen it on a few other channels and things, and it seems to be doing pretty good. But I was fortunate enough in my area. I don't always get things in my area. I was fortunate enough to get one. So we're going to try it and see what we got. Ooh, I love the ones that comes in these canisters. Yes, and this isn't all me. I didn't drink all that. Look at that. Oh. All right, so complicated. Checked off the first one. This is definitely not complicated, but there's more to it. It's not simple, base level bourbon kind of thing. This is some exotic fruits, some smoke. Interesting. I say exotic fruits. I'm talking like mango, maybe. I got a little apricot the other day. There's a little bit of vanilla in there, just a touch. It's not bourbon level sweet bourbon vanilla, but there's a hint of vanilla. There's oak in there, which, I didn't even know that in a pot stilled Irish whiskey you could get oak, but there's some in there. Really pleasant. The nose on this is absolutely it's inviting. It says, hey, come drink me, and I'm going to. And then I don't know if you can tell, but if you look on that glass, you can see kind of oily around the sides. That it's got something going for it. So let's try. Immediately on the palate, right on the front of my tongue, like some black pepper, like right away. Usually when I drink a whiskey or a bourbon, the spice I get in the backside, compared to a Wild Turkey 101, I always get the spice on the backside and maybe a little on the side of the tongue. This is right at the front and immediately just coats your mouth. The oils that we're seeing on here just absolutely just through the entire mouth, just coats. It's so yummy. I forgot to even figure out what the finish was. I was so excited about that first sip. Yeah. On the top of the tongue, I get different flavors in all parts of my mouth. Pepper on the front, barrel, a little bit of oak in the middle, kind of leathery maybe, but not like dark, deep leather, but definitely some smoke, and that smoke is wonderful. That smoke like takes the exotic fruit and sort of whoop, twists it. So like you get the fruit on the nose, and then as you taste it, you get the fruit and it just sort of turns really smoky and dark, but nice. And then it floats down the back, and I'm still feeling it a little bit. Got the barrel char going down the back. I say barrel char, some oak or spice. Sometimes it's hard to tell the oak versus the spice, but there's definitely black pepper in here. Anyway, all right. Look, that was really good. So, is this neutral? Well, how do you relate neutral to a whiskey? Boy, this is going to be harder than I thought. No, not neutral. This is viscous. This is, if I thought of neutral as a drink, I would think of plain. This is definitely not plain. Isolated, yeah. I'm isolating some pepper on the front of the tongue. I'm definitely, yeah, this is kind of a weird relation here, but bear with me here. Restrictions. Are there any restrictions? Oh, heck no. That doesn't work. So we didn't get that one. We didn't get the neutral, but it is under the complicated and isolated. So how about sharp? Absolutely. That pepper right there on the tongue and back, that is just, it's a pinpoint, like absolutely feels like when you say tip of the spear, it's hard to describe that taste, but that's what I'm getting. So yes, we got 3 out of 5. It is complicated. There's parts of it that isolate in your mouth. Not all whiskeys do that. And it is sharp. We did not get neutral. I'm sure there's a way I could relate that. And is it restricted? Well, it used to be restricted. It used to be restricted and not in the US, but it is now. So we got 3 out of 5 this time. And thank you for watching Whiskey Book, and we'll see what happens the next time.